Hello, my quilty friends. It's Stacy of Stacy Creates Stuff, and today I am bringing you a new quilt tutorial. This is a quilt that I designed featuring a new Riley Blake collection. I did use some other Riley Blake fabrics from some older collections, but the feature of this particular quilt are the pillow panels. This panel has 4 large sea creature blocks on it, and I use those as the focal point, putting in a storm at the sea background, if you will. I love the way that a storm of sea has that undulating movement through the quilt, and I think I really capitalized on that with the fabric choices that I made. Now, if you've already purchased a kit from Vintage Pink and Green, and you have been waiting for this video, I apologize for the delay. It actually took me longer to edit the video than it did to make the quilt. What can I say? It's here now, and I am going to walk you through step by step, both in cutting the fabric and also in sewing the different components together. If you do not yet have a kit, there are still a few available as of the uploading of this video. We sold out once and got in some more fabric panels and were able to make up another set of kits. There is a link in the description below on how to purchase the kits. And if you are interested in just the pattern, at this time it is only available to my Patreons, and I have a link in that description below. If you are a Patreon, that is this month's free pattern. I will eventually have the pattern by itself available in my Etsy store. I will put a link below in the description when that becomes available. All right, let's get right to it. I have my stack of fabrics, my rotary cutter and ruler, and I am ready to get started. Let's start with the orange. The kit includes a fat 1/8, and we're going to go ahead and cut a 3.5 inch strip. From this strip, I'm going to subcut into 4 3.5 inch squares. I'm going to go ahead and fold my strip in half so that I can make less cuts. I am going to trim off the selvage. There's 2. There is 4. So I'm going to set these aside on one of my Riley Blake design boards. I'm going to take this remaining bit of the strip and cut it down to 2 inches. I won't need this part. Then I'm going to subcut this strip into 2 inch squares. I need a total of 5. Since I can only get 3 out of that strip, I'm going to go ahead and take my leftover bit here and just cut off a 2 inch strip in the short direction. No sense in cutting a long 2 inch strip to make 2 little 2 inch squares. This fabric is not directional, so it makes no difference at all. All right, I'm going to put those 5 little squares also on the design board for the time being. Next up, we have our navy fabric, and from this I need 4 2 inch strips, and then those are going to be subcut down into 71 2 inch squares. I'm going to go ahead and fold this fabric a little further. I can use my short ruler. I've stacked up my strips. They are folded in half once, so I have a total of 8 layers of fabric. So let's go ahead and cut off the selvages, bringing out the big gun. Each cut is going to give me 8 squares. Put these on my design board as well. Our next fabric to cut is the Ocean Reef. Now this fabric is directional and it is going in the sashing pieces, the long rectangles, and some of those are horizontal and some of those are vertical. So keeping that in mind, we're going to make some cuts. First, I'm going to go ahead and square up the edge of the fabric. And the first cut I'm going to make is a 6.5 inch wide strip. We'll come back to that fabric in a moment, but let's go ahead and subcut this strip to see how many pieces we get out of it. I'm going to shift it slightly so that I can trim off the minimal amount of selvage that I have. All right, then we're going to go ahead and cut these down into 3.5 inch pieces. So they'll be 6.5 inches by 3.5 inches. All right, I got 12 of those. And again, those are directional. I'm going to go ahead and place those for now on my design board. We need a total of 14 of these pieces that are vertical. So this time I'm going to cut a 7 inch wide, not 6.5. And that's because I only need 2 more out of it. And if I cut it 7 inches wide, I can then cut that in half to make 2 3.5 inch wide strips, which is what the next part is going to require. And then cut 3.5 inches off of that. And again, it's folded in half, so I'm getting 2. And since I got 12 before, this makes 14. Oops, before I put those there though, remember it's 7 inches, so I just need to trim off 1/2 inch. Perfect. Now I'm going to take the rest of this 7 inch width and I'm going to trim it down to 3.5 inches. And that'll make 2 pieces that are each 3.5 inches. Can stack those on top of each other. And I'm going to subcut these down into 3.5 by 6.5 inch rectangles. So these rectangles are the same size, but the orientation is going differently. So remember, these were for a vertical, and this is going to be horizontal. Each cut's giving me 4, so I have 8, and I need a total of 14. Go ahead and open this out so I get 2 out of that. I'll set this piece aside for now. I'm going to cut another 3.5 inch strip, and the same thing. I'm going to trim up my selvage edges and then cut 6.5 inch lengths off of this strip. All right, I now have my 14 horizontal rectangles. So I'll place those on my board. Now from this remaining bit of the strip, I'm going to go ahead and cut a 2-inch strip and then cut 2-inch squares from this. We're going to need a total of 38 2-inch squares, and so far we have 8. So we'll need some more 2-inch strips. I have stacked my 2 strips on top of each other. Trim off the selvage, and then each cut will yield me 4 more squares. Running out of space on this board, let me grab another. Time for turtles. And this is going to be very similar to our last cut, except the turtles really aren't directional, so we don't have to worry so much about cutting the 6.5 and then the 3.5. We can actually just go ahead and cut more 3.5-inch strips and subcut those down. We'll need a total of 5 3.5-inch strips. For these, I'm going to lay 2 stacks next to each other. One has 3, one has 2, and I'll just cut through that way. These now need to be subcut into 6.5-inch lengths. For this last cut, I'm just going to go ahead and move one of the pieces from the other stack, so I now have a stack of 4. And now my turtles are all cut. I should have a total of 27. I actually have 28 since I didn't open up that last strip to only be able to cut off 1. Figure there's no harm in having an extra. Let's go ahead and put these on the board. And actually, before I get too much further, let's rearrange our board slightly. Let's go ahead and put all of these. These are for the sashing pieces. So I have my horizontal and vertical of the dark blue, and then the turtles as well. So we'll put that aside for now. And then this has 2-inch squares, and then the larger, I believe, 3.5-inch square. Speaking of 2-inch squares, we need to cut some from our turtles, and we need a total of 38. So I can use the leftover bits, or I can just go ahead and cut 2 2-inch strips from the remaining fabric. Let me fold this in half. All right, that's actually 40, but again, better to have a few extras. Since it's a 2-inch square, we're going to go ahead and put it on this board. Next up is the aqua waves. After trimming up my fabric, I'm going to cut 2 4.25-inch strips. I'm going to flip my ruler around so I don't have to deal with a 1/2 inch on that end. Going to go ahead and trim the selvage off of these 2 strips that I've stacked on top of each other. And we're going to subcut those down into 4.25-inch squares. We need a total of 14. We have 12 so far. Since I only need 2, I'm just going to take this one strip. We're going to cut these down further by cutting them twice on the diagonal. I am not going to go through all these layers at once, but you do want to make sure that they are lined up. Use my handy dandy Lazy Susan here. And I'm just cutting from corner to corner in one direction. And then in the opposite. Let's get a new board for these. I'm going to move over my larger orange. Since this is directional fabric, that way I can maintain the direction. These two don't really matter. They could go either way, and the same with the sides, but this just makes things a little bit easier. They get moved apart a little bit, make sure you put them right back together until you've made the other cut. From our remaining pieces, I'm going to subcut these down into 3.5 inch wide strips. So this is that partial strip. Then I'm going to subcut this into 3.5 inch squares. I need a total of 38. We're going to need some more 3.5 inch strips. And just keep cutting 3.5 inch squares until you have a total of 38. These can go on the board with all the 2-inch squares. Next up, we have our pale blue solid. And the reason I like using a solid for this particular block piece is because it's the same on both sides, and that will make your life much easier. Because we have to cut so much, I'm going to go ahead and double over my fabric, trim up the edge, and I'm going to cut a total of 7 4.5 inch strips. I'll open it up to cut off that last strip since I only need 7. I'm going to go ahead and stack 3 and then also 4. Put them right next to each other and go ahead and take off the selvage. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut these down into 2.25 inch lengths off of these strips. So the rectangle that is a result will be 4.5 inches by 2.25. If you find it's too difficult to cut through all these fabric layers, then certainly you can cut each strip separately. We need a total of 110 of these rectangles. When you have all the rectangles cut, you are then going to subcut them. Now, because this is a solid fabric, I only need to cut once, and I will be able to have a reflection. So no matter where I need to place this piece, it will be fine because I can use both sides of the fabric. Well, either side of the fabric. If your fabric is printed, then you would need to make sure that half of your rectangles would get cut in one direction and the other half would get cut in the opposite direction. But I chose a solid for this kit, and pattern makes life a lot easier. And just remember, you're only making one diagonal cut on these. so many triangles. Those are going to go on the board with the long rectangles. Up next is this medium blue small print. You will cut 3 4-inch strips, and then you will subcut these into 28 4-inch squares. Now, even though this fabric has a direction, I'm not going to treat it as a directional fabric. So sometimes it'll appear this way, and sometimes it's going to appear that way. It's going to be a triangle in the end, and they'll be all over. It will just add movement. If you are concerned and really do want your triangles to all be pointing in the correct direction, then you can certainly do that. I will show you how. Once you have your stack of squares, you're going to cut them once on the diagonal. If direction matters to you, then you're going to want to split your stack in half, and you will cut one set of diagonals this way and the other set of diagonals this way. If you want to determine whether it's going to bother you or not that they're going in opposite directions, you can kind of do this to see what it's going to look like. This will not bother me, so I'm going to cut all of mine in the same direction. When your triangles are all cut, we're going to add those to the board that has the twice cut and the orange squares. Now we're really getting down to the fun parts, and that is fussy cutting this fun little sea creature fabric. We're going to be getting 3.5-inch squares, and there is enough fabric on here for you to easily cut 10 if you plan. If you don't really care, then you can certainly just cut some 3.5-inch strips and subcut those down into 3.5-inch squares. I have this 4-inch ruler, which is going to give me a little bit of a guide, at least to figure out what might look good. So the turtle is going to be a fun one, and might even be able to get the starfish and the fish. I think the easiest thing to do is going to be to draw around the elements that I want. Now again, this is a 4-inch ruler, so it's a 1/2 inch larger than what I'm looking for. But I think if I can go ahead and lay out some lines, it will just give me an indication of what I can get away with. So that's super cute. Let's go ahead and do these fish up here. These overlap the turtle, but I have another set of fish. That's why there is a fat quarter in the kit rather than a long quarter, because it gives you enough, leadway. But I can get out this seahorse. There's my only octopus, though. So what can I do with him? Well, keeping in mind that this box is a little larger, I'm going to just come over 1/4 inch, and I'll be able to get most of that octopus in there. I would never be able to fit the whole thing in anyway, because he is much larger than 3.5 inches. Oh, I love the crab. Let's be sure to get him. Here are those fish again. So I think we can go ahead and get them in there. Again, with that overlap, I think we can get these fish again also. We can get this blue fish, which will include a little bit of the turtle maybe, and the starfish. We're getting the crab out of this one, so we have to just watch what we're getting here. 2 more to go. Let's get another seahorse. All right, I'm going to take some scissors and rough cut these out, and then I'll be able to trim them up a little more carefully. Perfect. I have 10 fussy cut bits that now I'm going to go ahead and trim down. So again, the final is 3.5 inches square. These are probably easier to trim on my rotating cutting mat. We're going to put our fussy cut squares on with our orange square and our triangle pieces. That brings us to the last piece of fabric in this quilt top, and that is the focal point, the panels. So for these, you can go ahead and cut them apart. Conveniently, there is a nice dotted line to give you a reference point. They currently measure about 17.5 inches, maybe 17 3/4. We're going to be trimming them down to 15.5 inches. But for now, rather than trim them completely down to that size, I would just go ahead and cut them apart. You can also cut off this bit of fabric here at the top and bottom. At this point, you should have 3 design boards of things. So this is the main block. It is made up of a centerpiece, and we actually have 2 different kinds of centerpieces, the orange and the fussy cut ones. Then it is surrounded by these triangles, and then finally on the outside are these triangles. So this block is sometimes called the economy block, or square in a square in a square block, but these are all the pieces that we need for that. Our other design board is this stack of small squares with the wave print, and then all of the 2-inch squares. And our third design board are the sashing pieces. So we have all of our very long, skinny triangles, and then a bunch of rectangles. So I'm going to show you how to make each type of block, and then I'll show you how to put them all together. We're going to start by making a post block. And this is the little square, and we're going to be making 5 of them that use 1 orange square. All the rest will substitute that orange square with a polka dot square. The polka dot's used in all of them as well. So I'm going to start by placing the orange square in the upper right-hand corner. And I'm going to draw a diagonal from corner to corner of that small orange square. I'm going to go ahead and sew just inside of that on this part that's going to be cut away. I've sewn that, pressed it in place. I'm going to go ahead and remove the excess fabric. In the opposite corner, so the lower left corner, and I'm orienting so the waves are going across. If you don't care which way the waves are going, then it doesn't matter which corner you start in. But if you want the waves to follow the same direction throughout the quilt, you will need to place that first square in the upper right And then opposite of that will be the navy polka dot. And again, I'm just going to draw along from corner to corner of the navy square. And so just inside of that line. Now we have these two in place. I'm going to trim the excess. In this lower right corner, I'm going to place the dark blue print. And just as we've been doing, I'm going to draw a line from corner to corner of the square, and so just inside of that line. My orange square has gone just a little bit beyond the edge of the wave fabric, and that's okay. We'll be able to trim down the square before we assemble them. Our print is in place. Again, I'm going to trim the excess. And then our last square goes in place, right sides down, and that is the turtle. And I'm concentrating on aligning the turtle square to the wave square in that corner. Draw my diagonal line. And sew. And here is our completed post block. And I'm going to again remove the excess fabric. And we can trim this block down to 3.5 inches. We'll make a total of 5 that use the orange squares, and then 33 that will use 2 navy blocks. So I'm going to be doing my polka dot blocks first, and then adding on the others. It's important with the ones with the orange square that they go in this particular order, with the darker blue print going in that lower right-hand corner. Once you do the squares with the 2 dots, then it doesn't really matter as long as the polka dots are opposite each other and these 2 fabrics are opposite each other. It does make a difference though with the orange ones. Next up is the economy block, or square in a square. This is the main block of the quilt other than the panel pieces, and it is comprised of our fussy cut squares surrounded by the little ocean waves, and then these tone-on-tone triangles that frame it out completely. Why the orange squares? Well, 4 of the blocks will have orange centers instead of the fussy cut squares. So we'll be making 4 with orange centers and 10 with fussy cut centers. So let's start by prepping how we're going to sew this. We're going to take our center square, and then we'll take one of our wave triangles. Now you can see that we started with a whole square and we've cut it twice on the diagonal, and I've kept them stacked like this on my design board, so it's easy to just go, okay, this goes here, and flip that. And this will keep everything in the right orientation. So I am going to start with the side pieces, and I will sew each of those with a 1/4 inch seam, press those open, and then I will sew the top and bottom triangles. To figure out where you need to align these two, you can just pinch in the center there, pinch along the center side, and align those pieces up. I also just kind of figure out that the little dog ears should be about equal on each side. Let's get this one sewn. All right, we have those 2 triangles sewn in place. Now I'm going to take one for the top and one for the bottom. Align them the same way. Sew those into place. All right, now that we have our first square done, we're going to go ahead and trim this to 4 3/4 inches. I've already trimmed this one side off camera. My dog started whining. Looks like I've sewn one of my triangles, so it's a little bit short, but there is enough there to catch a seam allowance. So I'm going to go with it. And I'm going to reorient the block so that our seahorse is right side up. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew the outside triangles onto the block. I'm going to do opposite sides first. Then I will come back and sew the other 2 triangles. Here's a bonus tip. If you lay out your blocks on your design board like this, then it's easy to keep track of which triangle goes on which side of the block. There is the completed block, and I'm going to trim this down to 6 1/2 inches square. When you're squaring up, you want to try to make sure that you are about 1/4 inch away from all of the points of the inner square. And there we have another completed block. Next block is the sashing block, and this has a diamond surrounded by triangles. And I'm trying to make this as simple as possible for you. So for those who purchase the kit from Vintage Pink and Green, you will receive this template in your kit. Let me show you how it works. You will take one of your rectangles, which end up being the center diamond. And it doesn't matter if it's the turtles or if it is the navy print or the dark blue print. And remember that dark blue print, we have some oriented vertically and some horizontally, but the turtles, they swim all over, so it doesn't matter. But I'm going to show you how to use the template on the turtles. With the turtles right side up, you're going to place the template onto the rectangle. If it makes it a little bit easier for you, you can fold the rectangle in half, give a little press, fold it in half this way, give a little press, and that gives you your center points. And then you can use the template by aligning that center creases in the little slits here. Then I'm just going to take my air erasable pen and draw on the sides of the template. Right, it might be a little hard to see on camera, but I have my distinct lines there. These are the edges that I'm going to align my triangles to. These are essentially the edges. This is not the sewing line. This is the alignment line, if you will. So the triangles are solid color, so they're reversible, makes life a little bit easier. And I am just going to align my triangle along that drawn edge. And I have about 1/4 inch of a little dog ear at that end. There's much more at this end, and that's fine. So when I sew, I should be catching about where they meet here. And I'm going to sew 1/4 inch from the edge. I'm going to do that for the opposite corners. So let's go ahead and sew those. And always make sure your triangles are oriented in the right way. So if you try to orient them, it's hard to do it the wrong way. This way, so that you get this right angle, and then when you flip that over, that will be wrong. So you want to make sure that the wider part of the triangle is mirroring to the wider part of this rectangle that's showing. And again, about 1/4 of an inch. These rectangles are designed to be a little bit larger than what you need, so you'll be able to trim them down in the end. It just makes it a lot easier to trim than to really try to get them precise. Besides that, would have had to have cut a really funky size rectangle to start. Anyway, let's sew these. All right, I have sewn 2 triangles on. Now I'm just going to go ahead and sew the opposite 2. When I'm sewing them, I like to start at the wider end. I find it's more difficult to start sewing in this end, so I will have to orient my stitching that way. I still like to sew with the triangle on top. I'm just going to be aligning it on my machine this way and using the right side of my 1/4 inch foot as a guide for sewing. All right, here is the completed block all pressed, and you're going to trim this block to 3.5 by 6.5. Here's a trick for trimming the sashing pieces. If you flip it to the back side, and you can use that original large rectangle, which is already 3.5 by 6.5, and you can align your ruler to that and trim any of the excess blue triangle material. And there you have your sashing piece. You'll make a total of 27 of these that use the turtle fabric, and there are 28 that use the darker blue print. 14 will be horizontal and 14 will be vertical. Now that all the blocks are made and trimmed, it is time to trim down the pillow panel pieces. Say that 3 times fast. They are going to be trimmed down to 15.5 inches square. And that does mean that you are going to be cutting off a little bit of the design. These panels measure about 17.5 inches. So we're going to have to cut about 1 inch off of each side. I'm going to start by just trimming up and evening off one of the sides, going about 1 inch in from the print edge. There's more of this red over here, so, you know, if a little bit of that gets cut off, I think it's all going to be just fine. And now I'm going to need to measure across. Going to gather several rulers here. So I have an 8.5 inch, a 6 inch, and another 6 inch, but I won't need all of that one because I need to get a total of 15.5 inches. And of course I want where I'm going to cut to have a long side for that ruler. So the 8.5 plus the 6, that's 14.5. I need 1 more inch. So I am going to align 1 inch of that last ruler there, and you can see I'm only cutting off a little bit of that red, so that's not bad at all. All right, so now my width is taken care of. So let's move these out of the way for just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and, using my wider ruler as a guide, I'm going to go ahead and trim off this much, which we still have all the fish. This is just under the water with nothing going on. Won't miss that at all. And now let's see. As you've noticed, I'm ambidextrous, so I can cut with either side of the ruler, but you could turn your panel around. And it doesn't really matter which ruler goes next. It's the same thing. I just need 1 inch of a ruler, then the 6 inch, and then the 8.5. So you can see now I'm going to be cutting off more than I really want to. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this down. And remember, this also includes the seam allowance, so we'll be losing 1/4 of an inch off of what we cut. But I'm pretty happy with cutting that much off, and that will be a little over 1/2 inch cut off at the top. And when it's sewn, we'll just be able to get all of that little fish from the school of fish going through. So realigning all my rulers, 1 inch of that ruler, we have the middle ruler, and then we can just trim off that piece right there. And we have our 15.5 inch square. We'll repeat that with the other panels, and then we'll be ready to start putting the quilt together. The quilt is assembled in quadrants, along with a long strip that is made up of posts and sashing. So here I am putting together the pieces that go with the first quadrant. And once I have each of the small sections sewn together, I am then going to assemble the whole quadrant. Once I have the whole quadrant done, I'm going to repeat that same process using the layout instructions in the pattern to complete the quilt top. And here we have the first quadrant done. So 3 more quadrants to go, and then we can start putting the whole thing together. Oh, and don't forget about that row of posts and sashing that will go between the upper quadrants and the lower ones. I am pressing all the seams open for this quilt. That is not my usual method of pressing seams, but I found that it was the best way to lessen the bulk. There is so much fabric at the points where 2 points meet and also where 2 corners meet that this seemed to be the best solution. And this is also probably the most tedious part of the whole quilt construction. And even where I joined a panel, I also pressed that seam open. Even though it would have been way easier to just press it towards the panel, again, because there are corners that meet up with a lot of fabric, that just put way too many layers of fabric at that corner, all concentrated on the panel side. So spreading the love. Here is the top half of the quilt, quadrants 1 and 2 sewn together. Be extra vigilant about the placement of the fabrics in the post block, especially if you want to keep the waves all in one direction. I had to remake a couple of these. Take your time sewing each quadrant and double check block placement and orientation as you complete each part of the quadrant. It's easy to get things turned around. And here is the finished quilt. It is hanging outside of Vintage Pink and Green, which is the only place that you can get kits. I have a link in the description below to purchase kits from Vintage Pink and Green. And if you are interested in just the pattern, well, that is available to my Patreons. So I will leave the link for that in the description below as well. This has been a very popular kit, and I loved making this quilt. So I hope that if you have purchased the kit or are planning to purchase one, that this video will really help you to put it together. It is not a difficult quilt to make. The real key is organization. I really recommend using those Lori Holt project boards. They are invaluable. They really helped keep all my pieces together. And if you don't have those, that's fine. Just keep your pieces well organized. I would love to see how your quilt turned out, so be sure to tag me on social media at Stacy Creates Stuff. That's it for this tutorial, my friends. Thank you for joining me, and I will be back again very soon with another quilting tutorial. Bye!